Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz pianist Mike Jones. Right out of Buffalo, New York, he's living in Las Vegas these days, and he's been at this jazz gigging thing for a long time. These days he's promoting his very nice 2016 CD called Roaring, and it's already charting very well. Author Neil Gaiman said that he has magic fingers, and that could have led to his long-running Vegas gig with Penn and Teller. He does all the music for their shows these days, and he's done it for a long time. In the early years, he got some good advice from legend Oscar Peterson on going to the Berklee College of Music in Boston. Mike is full of great stories, heart, and jazz insights. Get to know Mike and dig this interview, my friends.
I'm fine. Everything's exciting here in Vegas.
Oh, every day, man.
yeah, it's a new adventure. It's a permanent. I call Vegas the world's largest cruise ship stranded in the desert.
That's a good way of putting it, man.
You know, it's the kind of city that Penn and Teller can do 250 nights a year in a show and have a different crowd every night.
That's the key. That is the key right there, for sure. Well, thanks for taking some time out for me today, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, I'm happy to. I'm excited about the CD and stuff. So I don't know how it's doing in terms of. I mean, it comes out next Friday. It was an iTunes exclusive. It came out last Friday, and shockingly, it went up to number 10 on their top 40 list.
Right on.
I was shocked. I mean, I'm hopeful that I can get some gigs when Penn and Teller are off, and it's getting tiring hearing I've never heard of you.
Right. Absolutely. Well, you know what they say, any buzz is good buzz. That's for sure, man.
Right.
Right.
So you're in Kansas City?
I'm in Kansas City proper, the home of Charlie Parker.
Excellent. He was good,
Oh my God.
I heard that.
I'll tell you one thing. Doing this, being somebody that interviews and has my own jazz radio show, I know the profound impact that Charlie Parker has had on the world of not only Kansas City but jazz. But when I look at music overall, he is always the first person that people mention as the one that really showed them the jazz light, or still blows their minds.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because he was like somebody from outer space. You know what I mean? He just appeared, full. I mean, I read the Stanley Crouch book, and it was mostly fiction, but from what I understand, but it's still a good book. But I mean, nobody was thinking this way, except, as I often point out to people, because I'm biased, but the only person thinking and playing those kind of harmonies was Art Tatum.
Yeah.
I mean, Art Tatum's harmonic sense was like 30 years ahead of his time. But Bird, the phrasing and everything else that he came up with was just, it's unbelievable. I mean, and it's still, I don't care what anyone says. There has been no real advancement on that. You know what I mean? I mean, there have been different styles of jazz that have come along, and there have been different, there's obviously different movements and different ideas, and everyone's got their own voice and all that. But I mean, that was like, oh, well, this is what you do, and then everything else is sort of sprung from that, But there hasn't been another like completely earth-shattering split between swing and bebop. Has never happened again,
I think we've kind of covered what's been going on, and I'm going to get to Penn and Teller and that gig that you've had. But let me go ahead and dive into what is ever present right now, and it's this great new album you have, Roaring. Talk to me about what went into this and how you feel about it in the afterglow of its release.
I'm really happy. I'm not a guy that is good at talking about. I'm promoting myself. You know what I mean? I'm learning how to do that because you have to. But I've been around for 30 years, and I did a number of records for Hank O'Neill's label, Chiaroscuro. Hank gave the label away to a public radio station a couple of years ago. Well, many years ago now, and with the idea that they would keep it in print, but Hank had sort of was done with the record business. Basically, I saw on Amazon that Jeff Hamilton Trio had a new record out, and I looked at it and listened to it and loved it, and I said, oh, I see it's on this Capri Records out of Denver, and I went to their website, and I hit the Contact Us link, and I wrote Tom a note, and I said, I'm looking for a label. And he responded to me. He called me back. And he said, I've heard of you. Let's talk about what we might want to do. And, my strongest is solo piano playing, like in the Dave McKenna style. And it's what I've spent many, many years doing, and I love it. But he was of the opinion, and rightly so, that solo piano records don't sell, and they hardly ever get played on the radio, and they don't get any attention. And I was aware of that fact after putting out 5 CDs for Hank that, I got 3 reviews. So what's hysterical is I put out the Plays Well with Others record. The first record I did for Tom had Jeff Hamilton on drums and Mike Garola on bass, and started, got the number 2 on the Jazz Week chart, and it got a lot of attention. But what's hysterical is I read a review the other day of Roaring that said, Mike's debut record a couple of years ago plays well with others. And I was laughing about that because, after 15 or 20 year career of putting out CDs, no one's ever heard of. I'm a new artist. So I'm hoping to be an overnight sensation at 53. But I love the record. We were going to, I was going to be on Broadway with Penn and Teller last summer. Tom had said, let's make a record while you're in New York with a New York rhythm section. And I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. I know some guys from when I was in New York, and I said maybe even we'll go whole hog and get Peter and Kenny Washington or some guys like that, really do that. About a month before we were sort of planning the date, he said, go to Google and Google Katie Thoreau and tell me what you think of her. And I went and was impressed. I said, she's really, really great. Do I really need a 26-year-old woman on my record that I thought was going to be with big name New York players? And he said, well, I believe Ken Poplawski was who told Tom. I know he was. He said he told Tom that I should use Katie and Matt. So I think I sent a note to Ken and said, do I really need this woman on my record? And he wrote back, yes, you do. So we show up at the studio, and I say okay, and we show. And Katie and Matt are engaged, and so they play together all the time. And Matt is sort of Jeff Hamilton's understudy. So I knew I would like his playing. And so we show up at the studio, and she pulls the bass out. And she does this run up and down the fretboard, and it's just this gorgeous tone, this big, fat Ray Brown sound that I love. And I said, man, that sounds great. And she sort of holds the bass away from her and looks at it and says, yeah, they set these up nice for me. It's a rental. It wasn't even her instrument, And I mean, to give you an idea how quickly it came together, there's a track on the record, I Can't Believe That You're in Love with Me. It literally is the first thing we played together. I just counted it off when we started, and they were just so much fun to work with and swung so hard that, I could just relax. I mean, the problem with doing a record with Jeff Hamilton is he's Jeff Hamilton. You get the benefit of the greatest jazz drummer in the world who's played with every one of my heroes who, when I was 15 or 16, I bought a copy of the Montreux Alexander album, and I wore out 2 vinyl copies of it, and then bought it on CD when CDs were invented. But so and Jeff obviously is the drummer on that, and then all of a sudden obviously I was a huge Oscar Peterson fan, and I hung out a little bit with him, and I look, and Jeff's playing for Oscar, and Jeff's playing for Ella Fitzgerald, and Jeff's playing for everybody in the world, And so the problem with making a record with Jeff is you get the dream of playing with this unbelievable drummer, but you think to yourself, well, what can I possibly play that he hasn't heard Gene Harris Monty Alexander, Oscar Peterson, Tommy Flanagan. You know what I mean? You just run down the list of every great jazz piano player that he's played with. And so I was nervous as all hell making that record because I'm thinking, what am I going to play that he's going to enjoy? So, but obviously it worked out well, and we turned out to be, we're very good friends, and he really liked it. And so I heard from an independent third party that he really enjoyed playing with me. So I guess he wasn't just being polite. But, that's how nervous I was. This record, I could just go in and do whatever I wanted, knowing that the sound, the rhythm section was there and going to kill it, and there wasn't that intimidation factor. You know what I mean, of playing with a name that everyone knows. And so subsequently, it was much more relaxed on my behalf. And we made the record like in 4 hours with a break for lunch. Almost everything is the first take. Well, I'm kind of a firm believer that one or two takes of anything is all you should need if you're a professional musician. You know what you want to say. The most spontaneity comes out in those things. I mean, if you've got a super complicated arrangement where you've been working with guys, and you need 3 or 4 rehearsals, that's a different thing. Even then, you do the rehearsals, and then when you get to the studio, you do it once or twice, and you have it, because once you get into take 4 and 5, you're trying to remember what you played in the first take that you liked, and so there's no spontaneity. It just becomes, I want to make sure I get this in, and then, and so, that was the basic idea of making the record. For the idea of making all 1920 songs, there's sort of a 2-part idea behind that, which was, I'm always, I love Sonny Rollins, and I don't think anyone that has half a brain doesn't. I love the stuff that he did in the late 50s, The Sound of Sonny and those records, where he would just, every album or so, he'd throw in 1 or 2 of these old vintage 1920s tunes, like Tootsie Goodbye or I Found a New Baby and stuff like that. And, not in an ironic way necessarily, but just push them to the absolute edge of what they could be. And what I liked about it was he was making sure that they were seen as something that could have been written yesterday. You know what I mean? He wasn't playing them in an old-timey way and in Vododiodo way. He was playing the hell out of them in a really current. I mean, you listen to those records from that era, and they're every bit as fresh as they are as today as they were then. And so that always was like something that was in the back of my mind. I grew up with 2 player pianos in my house. I've always had this fascination with, Tin Pan Alley songs and, that kind of weird, I mean, there's thousands of songs written and played and were in people's homes back then that have, because they didn't become standards, just faded away completely. Now, on this record, I picked the most easily recognizable tunes from that era because I wanted to have a connection with someone say, oh yeah, I heard that song before, But at some point in my life, I want to do a record of all these weird little tunes from piano rolls that I learned growing up, like My Cuties Do It 222 Today, and Last Night on the Back Porch, and Mama Goes Where Papa Goes, or Papa Don't Go Out Tonight. These weird little, I mean, they just made them constantly. 20s, there was an insane amount of American homes that had player pianos in. They were like the stereos of today, And so there was this constant need for product, and they wrote all these songs that never went past that. And some of them are actually good. I mean, a lot of them are just goofy, but So that was, that was all one aspect of it. The other aspect was that my dad passed away last year at 88, and he loved that era of music. For him, jazz was Louis Armstrong and Frankie Trumbauer and that era. I mean, he was that music was old when he was a kid, I mean, my dad was born in 27, so but he still, that was, you know, when he went to New York in the 40s, he would go to Eddie Condon's and he would go to Jimmy Ryan's and see the trad guys, you know, and that's what he loved. So, you know, it was just sort of a nod to him as well, as you know, I knew that, you know, I knew he knew all those songs and loved them all. And as a matter of fact, the Irving Berlin song, I'll See You in CUBA, that was a song that we had the piano roll in my house when I was growing up. Wow. So, and that's from, I think, 1920. But, you know, so that's the idea. But I'm real happy with it, and I'm thinking it's a good record. You know, I mean, I can't judge. I know I'm a competent musician, but I try to play, you know, pleasingly. And I wanted to dig in a little more to them and play a little more angular things that I don't. I mean, no, you know, it's easy. The easiest thing for me is to just do what I do in the Penn and Teller show at the beginning, which is play this real high energy, 10,000 notes a song, because people are there to get jacked up to see a magic show. So right. My gig with Penn and Teller doesn't include any ballads, you know. I'm there for people to find I play for an hour before the show, and then I play all the music in the show. But, you know, it's easy to get in that trap of just chops, chops, chops. And I really wanted to make this a little more intimate and a little less look at me, you know what I mean? And play with the bass player and drummer a little bit more, and so, you know, so that's what I was thinking.
Right on. So it mentions in the liners here that Neil Gaiman says that you have magic jazz fingers. What do you think about that?
It's very nice. I mean, going back, I don't know if you're really familiar with Dave McKenna. Okay, well, Dave invented a way to play the piano that no one else had done, which was play a walking bass line, comp, and solo at the same time. When he came around in the mid-'50s, there was the mainstream guys that went the way of you know, Teddy Wilson, Art Tatum, Teddy Wilson, Oscar Peterson, that school. Then there were, you know, the guys that went through Bud, and you know, and then eventually sort of, in my mind anyways, morphed into the school of Bill Evans and that kind of stuff. And, you know, there were two guys that you couldn't even sort of classify. And one was Errol Garner and one was Dave McKenna. You don't hear a lot of Errol Garner impersonators. Everyone throws in a few block chord passages as sort of a nod to him in their playing, you know, but there's nobody really doing it because it didn't have a life after him. But, man, you listen to his stuff now, and again, it's just all this energy and great playing. And Dave sort of, out of necessity, fashioned this completely insane idea of playing the walking bass line, comping, and soloing all at the same time. I heard him. I was at Berklee in Boston. He was playing at the Copley Plaza Hotel, and I had never heard of him. My dad actually, I called my dad and I said, "There's this guy Dave McKenna playing." He said, "Oh yeah, you got to go see him." And I walked in, and here's a guy playing T for 2, like in all 12 keys at this breakneck tempo, playing the bass line, soloing, comping, everything. And it reminded me of a player piano, because not a lot of people care or know this, but, you know, player pianos were double tracked, just like LPs and stuff. They would put all the notes that they wanted in because it was mechanical. So, you know, you're looking at a player piano, and a lot of times 15 notes are being played on the piano at once. And since you only have 10 fingers, that's hard to do. Yeah. But I heard Dave, and it sounded almost like a player piano. I mean, the fullness. I mean, I couldn't believe what he was doing. And I look over, and, you know, he's listening to the Red Sox game while he's doing this. You know, he's got a little earpiece in, and he's listening to the Sox game. So, you know, I ran up to the piano, and Mr. McKenna, do you give lessons? And, you know, he looked at me, he goes, why don't you leave me alone? I'm just trying to make a living here, you know. But then I grew to be great friends with Dave. And I locked myself in a practice room at Berklee for 8 hours every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and 6 hours Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for over a year to try and learn how to do it. So, you know, there's this, everyone says, man, you sound like you got 3 hands. Oh, yeah. You know, and that's what, I'm sure that's what Neil's alluding to, you know, that, you know, I try to, you know, I make it sound like more things are happening than just, I mean, I've had people walk up to me. Now, in the Penn and Teller show, my hands there's a big screen in the stage for the pre-show, and you can see me playing. But before they put that up there, people would come up to me to see if it was sort of a recording and I was just pretending to play. Really complimentary or really insulting. So I mean, that's what me. I mean, Neil is a dear friend, and strangely for a guy of his, well, maybe not strangely, because Neil's like my age, maybe a couple of years older. For him to have he just loves my playing. He's a punker. You know what I mean? He's a guy that came up in the 70s in England. And there's no reason he should like it except that he's Neil Gaiman and he's incredibly cultured and incredibly brilliant and loves every kind of music. It sort of shocked me when I first met him like 15 years ago, and I gave him a CD just to be polite, and he sent me this note saying, "I just love it. I play it all the time." So
yeah.
So that's good. Plus, Neil is a guy that has a lot of fans.
Yeah.
So as I said, I got David Silverman from The Simpsons to do the cover.
Yeah.
And Neil Gaiman to write the note, and I said they don't even have to listen to the music. Just buy the CD. That's my marketing ploy.
Yeah, it's very attractive, man. It really is. But the one other thing that jumps out to me too is Oscar Peterson gave you advice and told you to go to Berklee. What is it like to get advice from somebody that you admired so much?
The deal was I got into a rehearsal. I was working with the principal percussionist for the Buffalo Philharmonic, was a great drummer as well, jazz drummer. And he said, "Well, you want to come to the rehearsal?" And I said, "Well, yeah, And so I went over to the rehearsal, and Oscar was playing with Whit Brown and Alan Dawson. And Whit Brown was teaching at Berklee. I think even Alan Dawson was teaching at Berklee at the time. And Oscar was enthralled because he had just gotten his Bosendorfer piano. And instead of delivering it to Mississauga, Ontario, where he lives, he had them deliver it to Kleinhans Music Hall in Buffalo that day. So it was the first time he was playing it as that it was his. And so instead of the rehearsal going for, a half an hour where they just ran down a couple songs, we spent about 3 hours there. And, of course, Oscar said, "Ooh, sit down and play something." And, I was scared to death. Literally, like, my hands were shaking. And he said, "Oh, you sound really good." He said, and we started talking, and he said, "Well, you should go to Berklee. These guys teach at Berklee, and it's a great jazz school." So the next day, I sent away for a catalog and an application, and the next semester I was there. And Oscar was, and then I saw Oscar a few more times and hung out with him, and then I didn't see Oscar for probably from 86 to maybe 99. So about, he had the stroke and he was sort of, out of commission, but I hadn't seen him at least 10 years. And I got this, Hank O'Neill, who owned Chiaroscuro, also produced the floating jazz festivals on the Norway and QE2. And I had done a few on the Norway and a few other ones for him on other ships. He called me up and he said, "We're going to do a big one on the QE2 because we're not going to do it on the Norway anymore. And it's a transatlantic crossing." And he said, "Do you want to do it?" And I said, "Of course." This was before I was with Penn and Teller. So he said, "Great." So I get the lineup, and it's everyone that he could get for this big gala first gig on the, it was just an all-star cruise. So I go the first night, I go to play my set, and I look at the piano, I sit down at the piano, and sitting directly next to me, looking at my hands, is Oscar Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
And sitting next to him is Monty Alexander. Sitting next to him is Shirley Horn. Sitting next to her is Tommy Flanagan. Sitting next to him is Junior Mance. Sitting next to him is Bill Charlap. Sitting next to him is Ted Rosenthal. Sitting next to him is, it was just every piano player on the ship was there.
Wow.
Right? Because I guess I had gotten a little reputation from doing other cruises, and they knew these guys. And I looked at them, and I sat down at the piano. I took one look at them, And I said, oh, no. And I got up and walked away from the piano. And then after they laughed, I went back and sat down and I started playing. And, after I finished the first set, I was walking by Oscar, and he grabbed my arm. He was in his scooter, He grabbed my arm and he pulls me down and he says, "You're taking no prisoners tonight, Mike." And it was so sweet. And I was really happy that he enjoyed it. But the story that I tell of that cruise was I had never met Monty, and I was a huge Monty Alexander fan, as anyone should be. And I'm walking down the hall the next day in the cruise. I'm just walking down towards my room, and Monty steps out into the hall. He gives me like this finger, like motioning me towards him, and I go into white hot panic. I'm like, oh my God, he's going to tell me I'm awful. What am I doing? I should quit playing the piano. I mean, I didn't know what, all these thoughts are going through my mind, right? And he pulls me aside and he says, "Look, Mike," he's got that weird kind of Jamaican-y accent, and he says, "You've got to stop this self-deprecating stuff, man." And I said, "What?" He said, "You're one of us, man. There's only like 2 or 3 of us in the world that can really play the piano, man. And you're one of us. And you've got to stop this talking down about yourself." And I said, "Monty, in 1977, I bought the Montreux Jazz album. I played 2 copies of it. I wore them out. And it was the second CD I bought when CDs were invented. Allow me to be a little self-deprecating in your presence." And he said, "No, man, you can't do that. Stop it." And I said so it was really funny. And then my head wouldn't fit through the doors of the cruise ship, that compliment lasted me like a year and a half. And,
my God, that's a great story.
But then, what's really funny is flash forward to about 3-4 weeks ago, Monty is playing out at in Vegas here at the Smith Center, and he's got Jeff Hamilton with him, and I wasn't going to miss that. And luckily, they were playing a Friday night, which we don't have. We have Thursday and Friday dark. So I go and I know Monty's wife Katerina a little bit, and I said, "Look, I know you guys, I know your schedule, but if you have an extra day and you want to come and see Penn and Teller, I'd love to get you guys tickets." She surprisingly said, "We'd love to come." I go to the gig on Friday night, and I see Jeff and I see Monty, and they were just killing. Right now they're at. I almost went up to Vail, Colorado last night because they're playing last night and tonight at the Vail Jazz Festival.
Right.
But anyways, be that as it may, he says to me, he says, well, he was real sweet after the show. He goes, "Oh man, my favorite piano player," and all this nice stuff. And so then he comes to the Penn and Teller show and he sees me do what I really do for them. And after the show, I brought him back to the green room to meet Penn and Teller, and they're hanging out. And he said, I told him that story of, because I figured, what's the chances he remembers that? And he looks at his wife. I said, you told me this. He looks at his wife and he says, "See, I can be nice sometimes." And but he's just the sweetest guy. And and Jeff is Jeff is Jeff. He's just a monster. And but they were at Vail. It was him, Jeff, and John Clayton doing the 40th anniversary of the Montreux Jazz album, of all things. So I would have loved to have seen that. But he's playing better than ever, and he's wonderful, wonderful guy. So anyways, as you can tell, I tend to babble on. So
it's good. No, it's good.
Anytime.
No, it's good. In fact, one thing that we keep kind of hitting on a little bit is your relationship with Penn and Teller. Talk to me about getting discovered by Penn when you were at the Las Vegas resort, and how this whole relationship began.
I was discovered. No. Penn, as I said, right after my 5th CD came out, I got discovered.
Exactly.
Penn, no. That's an even crazier story, and it's absolute. All this stuff is obviously absolutely true, but this is a nut story. There's a great close-up magician named Mike Close, And in the magic world, he is a superstar. He wrote the most important books on close-up magic technique of the past 40 years. He wrote the Workers' books, and every young magician buys these books and learns from them. He edits the magic magazine for the Society of American Magicians. Anyways, Mike Close is working a gig here in Vegas at the Houdini Lounge in the Monte Carlo where Lance Burton was appearing. And he would play a few songs, and then he would go do close-up magic at tables for people. And it was a wonderful gig, and he was really just wonderful. So Mike Close gets a $100 tip, and he decides to stop over at Borders and buy a few CDs. And one of the CDs he buys is an Oscar Peterson CD called On the Town with the Oscar Peterson Trio. It was one of those Verve Master Edition repackaging that came out in, well, I don't know, late 90s, early 2000s, whatever. And, I don't know if you remember that series, but they did.
Yeah.
They had a lot of great Verve releases back-to-back with Ellington and Hodges. And he opens up the liner notes of that CD, and they're all about me, because Neil Tesser, who's a good buddy of mine from Chicago, who got me the original intro to get the gig at the Green Mill that I do every year, I met, by the way, going back to one of the cruises. Neil was on covering the cruise for Jazz Times magazine, and that's how I met him. Anyways, we got to be good friends, and he called me up one day, and he said, look, you know Oscar better than anybody. What hasn't been discussed that I can talk about in his liner notes? I got to do these notes for this record. And I said his arranging, the arrangements. Listen to the arrangements, the four key changes and the, and the tempo, all that stuff. And I went on and on about it. And so the CD comes out, and the liner notes are mostly about me commenting on Oscar instead of like one or two quotes from me. They're like Mike Jones, the heir apparent to Oscar Peterson, and all this stuff, So Mike Close buys this CD, reads about me, and says I live in Las Vegas. This is before I was with Penn and Teller. So he calls the Musicians Union and calls up Frank Leone and says, hey, I want to see this guy, and do you have a phone number for him? So I get a phone call one afternoon, and I'm playing, by the way, the worst gig of my life. I'm playing in the Eiffel Tower restaurant while people, ignore me completely, and it's 5 hours for less money than I made when I was 16 years old. But that's another whole story, which we won't get into. But I came out here to work with a singer, and unbelievably, the agent lied to us, and there was no gig when we got here. So then I learned a valuable lesson, which was when the entertainment director for the Bellagio, I filled in for a week in the lobby, got a lot of compliments, and the entertainment director came down and he said, "You're the best piano player I've ever heard. I'd never hire you." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I don't want people paying any attention to the piano." He said, "I want people to come in and say, look, a piano player. Oh, look, a Wheel of Fortune." He said, "That's how much attention I want."
Yeah.
To the piano player. So yeah. I didn't know. So I was going to move to Chicago or maybe back to New York. Got this gig at the Eiffel Tower for $150 a night for 5 hours a night. And, it was awful. But anyways, so he calls me up and he says, "I want to see you play." Mike does. And I said, "Well, you can come any night if you want to pay $200 for a piece of cold fish, in a tourist restaurant." And he said, "Well, I'll be there. We're coming tonight." So that night he walked in with Penn. Penn was very polite and he bought all my CDs, which was to me a big boon because I think he gave me like $80 for 4 CDs. And I was ecstatic because I could eat that week. It was I was making $600 a week in 2001. And just to be polite, because I figured, I might as well. He said, "Man, I just started playing bass." And so to be polite, I said, "Well, I'm recording a new album next month here in town. They're bringing up, I'm a Kawai artist, so they were bringing up this Kawai EX 9.5-foot grand piano, this $150,000 piano. And they were bringing it up for me to record on. And then Hank and John Keel were coming out from New York City to record me. So just to be polite, I invited them to the recording. And I never, ever in a million years thought they would show up. Yeah. And Penn showed up with about 8 people. And we hung out a little bit, and he seemed like a decent guy. So then about 3 days later, he sends me an email, and he says, I'd like to hang out. You know, if you when we're in town, we're on the road a lot, but, I don't have a lot of friends in Vegas, and I really want to get into music more, and jazz, and I want to learn about it. And one thing about Penn and Teller both, when they want to learn about something, that they just immerse themselves in it. I said, yeah, sure, whatever. I kept it really casual because I figured to myself, I can't hang with this guy.
Yeah.
This guy's a multimillionaire. He's probably the kind of guy that spends $5,000 on booze in a strip club and stuff. Yeah. I can't go out to dinner. I can't afford a dinner with him. And I subsequently learned that he doesn't drink and he doesn't, and he doesn't spend money. So that was never an issue. And his mom had passed away, and my mom passed away that next month. And so when I got back, he sent me a note and he said, "Look, let's go to lunch." And I said, "Okay." And we went to lunch, and we had a lot in common. And he wanted to start having these little jazz jam sessions at his house with a couple of local musician guys, Lon Bronson and a few other people. And he had basically started taking upright bass lessons a year before. So we were doing that. He was learning songs and trying to play and stuff. So then, this was all in May and June. And then we started hanging out when they were in town and stuff, and, watching movies and just having fun. In December, they were going out on the road, and I think it was around the second week of January, he called me from the road, which was unusual, I thought maybe something happened at his house, and he wanted me to go over and check on it or something. And he calls me up one night, and he said, we're going to be at the Rio full time, and I think we want to have you play in the show. And I said, what do you need a jazz piano player in a magic show for? And he said, we want you to open the show. And he said, well, I want to play with you every night. And I said, you've been playing the bass for a year, Penn. You really want to play on stage in front of 1,400 people a night? He's like, yeah, fuck it, it's my show. And I said, okay, I'll give it a try. So they were coming back in February. I subbed out my gig at the Eiffel Tower, and I went over and did their show, and they liked it so much, and I've been with them ever since.
That's beautiful.
And yeah, it started out with an hour before the show, and Penn played 45 minutes with me, and I played the last 15 minutes myself. And then about 3 days into the gig, they said, well, do you think you could play the fire reading music instead of us using a tape? And I said, sure. And so I started playing the fire reading music. And then they said, oh, we got a new bit we're putting in. Do you think you want to write some music for that? And I said, sure. And then, now, basically I play the entire show.
That's wonderful.
I play between every trick in the show. And right now there's 6 or 7 tricks that I'm playing. The music is part of the trick. So,
right on.
Yeah, and it's been almost 15 years. So,
very cool.
It's a lot of fun.
The beauty of all of these stories that you've woven together is you've answered a lot of questions, but I have one more that I want to ask you. Why do you love jazz?
I love jazz for so many reasons. It's the music I grew up with, although it's just as easy to say that I grew up with Led Zeppelin too. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But when I was listening to everyone rave about how great Jimmy Page was, I had heard Joe Pass. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Sure.
So I knew the difference, and I knew what. But I grew up with jazz, and I was 6, 7 years old when I heard my first Oscar Peterson record, and it's just a part of me. It's why I play the style of jazz that I play, even more specifically. I could have easily gone the route of, through Chick and Herbie like everyone else did at Berklee when I was there, and Keith Jarrett, and there's, that music is amazing, but it doesn't speak to me in the same way that mainstream, bop and swing stuff, it just makes you feel better. I mean, nobody went to a Fats Waller show and came out angry.
No.
You know what I mean? I mean,
No.
And there's certainly an artistic choice to be made that if you're going to be an angry young musician and you're going to, talk about the strife that you go through in your music, but that's not what jazz is to me. What jazz is to me is making people feel better and enjoying it and having fun and listening to it and saying, man, he's playing his ass off, and it's fun, and it swings. And so that's the main reason. And the other reasons are that we're almost at the end of everyone that was alive that played this music in the first and second generation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a few guys left that are now in their 80s and 90s. When you turned the radio on and you could hear Ben Webster playing on the radio as just the popular music of the day, that's all gone. And I just sort of think that somebody has to keep going. You know what I mean? Even in my own little way, that's very derivative and not as, I like to think I have some original ideas, but, the biggest compliment I can get is that I remind people of Dave McKenna, or I remind people of Oscar Peterson in terms of that spirit and that idea of that music. And, it's so much jazz today is so overproduced and so sterile and so, we got to time out the drums. You know what I mean? What are you talking about? The music should breathe. It should get a little faster and a little slower. That's what the drummer's doing. He's adding his own voice to it. You don't need to sit there and dissect it on Pro Tools to make it even. And so but those are just some of the reasons why. It's the music of my youth, and it's the music that I just love. I mean, I could have gotten in a rock and roll band if I wanted to make money.
That's great. I love that answer. I think that's kind of a great way to kind of wrap everything up. Mike, thank you for taking some time out for me today. Great story.
Oh, my pleasure.
Love the CD.
All right, Joe. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Mike for his stories, and all of that great music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or visit the neonjazz.blogspot.com for all things Neon Jazz. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.